Hello A&P1 students. We are back to finish up talking about anatomy and physiology and the various categories or subdivisions of those two sciences. The last video we ended talking about the first three objectives. So understanding the different subdivisions or categories that we study when it comes to anatomy. So we had objective 4 to talk about next, and this one is the anatomy that we use primarily to diagnose and kind of determine what the cause of a disease or lesion is. And so these two that we're going to talk about, these are specialized subdivisions. One's pathologic, and one's radiographic. So let me go to our textbook. These are down here a little ways. So radiographic anatomy, if you're not familiar with the term radiograph, that refers to, a lot of times people just say x-rays. So the radiographic anatomy is the anatomy of being able to interpret or evaluate the human body based on some sort of image. So it could be a radiograph, like an x-ray, but there's a lot of other imaging techniques out there too. There's CT scans and MRIs and a lot of other ones too. So ultrasound. So those are all kind of under the radiographic anatomy category. So to give you an example here, I have some radiographs. So this one on the left is an image that we use contrast media to inject so that it would enter these areas of the urinary system or the renal system. So the kidneys, there's one here, and then the ureters. And then the bladder. So the reason I put this one up here is because if you look at a radiograph, which is over here, of a patient, it can be a little difficult because a lot of these organs that are there in the abdomen can kind of be superimposed, and it's a little bit more difficult to actually visualize the kidneys and the ureters and the bladder. So you kind of need to have an idea of where they normally would be located, so you have to kind of know their anatomy within the body. So this kind of helps a little bit to kind of show where these structures are located. So then when you're able to interpret or evaluate this radiograph a little bit easier, and so this one I chose because there's a little area right here. It looks like a mineral deposit because it's as white or as white as the bones. So these are the bones that turn up white. That little guy there is a kidney stone. It was up in the kidney, and then it tried to pass through the ureter and it got stuck right there. So in order to evaluate a x-ray properly and even position somebody to have an x-ray done and get the right parts of the body in there for the physician or radiologist that's going to interpret it, you need to be familiar with the anatomy. So that's a specialized subdivision called the radiographic anatomy. And so this is a radiograph. I think I also have. We go back to this one. This is a CT scan. Again, I did a kidney stone. This time the kidney stone's actually in the kidney. So there's pros and cons to the different imaging techniques. They all have some advantages and some disadvantages. So this is showing a CT scan, and this is showing an MRI. I think they called it use the U for the urinary system, but here that's a kidney. There's a little kidney shaped, looks like a kidney bean. And there's that little white opacity in there, which is a kidney stone. So again, you would have to be able to interpret. This is even a different view that we're looking at. Instead of looking kind of like from the front of the person, looking at the front of the person, we're actually looking at a section of the person through the area where their kidney is. So we would need to be able to interpret, this is back muscle, and then we have a spinous process of our vertebrae and the body of our vertebrae. So we need to be able to identify all these structures that are in there, and obviously the kidneys there too. So that's what they were imaging on this particular image. So all right, so that's radiographic anatomy. And then the other one is pathologic anatomy. So this is somebody that examines all the changes of the anatomy that can happen when there's a disease present. So for an example of that, we'll go back to my PowerPoints. Generally the people that are studying and very, very knowledgeable pathologic anatomy are the ones that are pathologists. And so that's their role, is to, generally they're helping physicians by looking at samples the physicians are sending to them from, various cells or tissues or body fluids. And they're looking at them they really know what normal is. They're very knowledgeable in that. So then they can detect when something's abnormal, and then they're so knowledgeable they can figure out like what the actual problem is and what disease is going on. So this is just showing kind of what like a pathologist, somebody that specializes in the pathologic anatomy. So they know over here is a slice of tissue from lung. And so these little white spaces, they have the little thin walls here. Those are the air sacs. We call them alveoli, but air sacs is kind of the common name for them. And so this would be normal. So the pathologist that's reading or looking at this tissue. So it's a tissue because it's lung tissue. So we're studying histology, we're studying tissue. But specifically, the pathologist is looking for anything that's abnormal in here. So this would be like what would be normal. So if they got a tissue slide like this, they'd say everything's fine. But sometimes they'll get lung tissue that looks like this. And so you can see that we don't have as many air sacs. A lot of those walls that were supposed to be around those air sacs are now gone. So we have like destruction of all those. So this is something, this example that is one where smoking was the thing that caused all the air sac walls to break down and be destroyed. So that caused a lot of problems here. So with the functioning of the lung. So then if we want to talk about, we're going to start talking about physiology. Then this pathologist is also going to be very good at understanding disease and the physiology part. So like what is going wrong with the functioning of this tissue whenever you have this sort of problem here. So we'll talk about that next, and I'll come back to this picture. All right, so that was Objective 4. So we got through all of the definition of anatomy and all the various subdivisions or categories of anatomy. So you should be familiar with those. The Objective 5 talks about the physiology. So we said earlier how physiology has to do with how the parts of the body, structures of the body function. So again, we have some subdivisions of that physiology area. So we have, I'm going to go back to the textbook. Yep. So under physiology, there's a few of them here, just some examples. We could go on and on with these, but they give us a few examples, so that's the ones we'll have you guys remember. First one is cardiovascular physiology. So that's going to be the study of the cardiovascular system. And they're going to be, obviously they're going to be knowledgeable about the anatomy of the cardiovascular system. So they have that systemic anatomy component. But whenever you're talking about cardiovascular physiology, you're kind of focusing on how does the heart function? How does the blood vessels function? How does the blood function that's in those blood vessels? And how that all works together to keep the blood moving through the body, keep, all our cells healthy. How do things get exchanged, from the blood and the tissue cells? So it goes into how it functions and how it works. Neurophysiology, we're talking about the nervous system And a lot of times we talk mainly about how those nerve impulses are, how they're generated and how they're sent down a neuron, which is a cell of the nervous system, and how that neuron can communicate with another neuron. So we'll talk about neurophysiology this semester, actually. And respiratory physiology, again, talking about how the lungs work, how they exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide in there. And then reproductive physiology, talk more about the hormones and how they control the reproductive organs, and how the sex cells, gametes are produced. All that information is under reproductive physiology. So that's just a few, just 3 of those, actually 4, got the respiratory in there, just 4 of those systems where you would understand, learn about, become more knowledgeable about how those systems work. And again, you still need the systemic anatomy to understand all the parts of the cardiovascular system, all the parts of the nervous system, as well as the reproductive and respiratory. So, okay. And then the last one is called pathophysiology. So there's that patho word. When I see patho, I think disease. So we talked about pathologic anatomy. Pathophysiology is, there's going to be somebody that is very familiar with whenever a disease is present in the A tissue organ system, they will know exactly how that particular disease affects the functioning of that system or organ or tissue. So this kind of goes along with the pathologic anatomy too. So most people that are very knowledgeable about pathologic anatomy are also the knowledgeable ones about pathophysiology. So what I was saying before, the pathologic anatomy, the pathologist can look at this and say, that's normal, we're fine. Look at this and say, that's not normal. There's probably something, causing the breakdown of these walls. In this case, we know it's smoking, but the pathologist might have to do more testing to determine if that's the cause. But then the pathophysiologist in that person would know that this is going to cause a major problem, because these air sacs, there's air here, and in these walls, in between the walls, there's little blood vessels. And so oxygen that's in the air sacs needs to get into the blood, so that the blood can carry the oxygen to all our other cells in the body, so that they can function properly. So this is good because we have plenty of surface area for all that exchange of oxygen. And then any carbon dioxide gets out of the blood, and then it gets into the air sacs, and then we breathe it out. So this is good. We have plenty of surface area for that to happen. So they call that gas exchange, whenever oxygen and carbon dioxide kind of go in opposite directions. So oxygen comes into the body, into the blood specifically, and then carbon dioxide gets breathed out. But over here, the pathophysiologist can tell that, we're having probably a major time with gas exchange. It's not happening like it should, and probably a lot of the cells of the body are kind of suffering from that because they're not getting the oxygen that they need. And it's mainly because there's just not enough surface area for that oxygen to get into the body and the carbon dioxide to get out. So that's kind of what a pathophysiologist would be looking at, is just how the tissues, organs, cells, how they look and how they don't function properly if they have a disease. So, all right, so we'll go back to our objectives. And I think what we'll do is, next video, we'll start talking about how anatomy and physiology are interrelated. And then we'll do a little bit more information about organization of the human body, and then kind of talk a little bit about the different functions of those organ systems that we have. So I will see you guys in the next video.